The moment Jane accepted the dried-out biscuit from the bottom of the tin, Yates Quinlan knew something was terribly wrong with how this woman saw herself in the world. He had ridden down from his mountain claim 3 days prior, his pack horse loaded with furs, and his saddlebags heavy with gold dust, seeking supplies and perhaps a warm meal that he had not cooked himself over an open fire. The settlement of Sloan, Nevada was hardly more than a collection of weathered buildings scattered along a dusty road in 1876, but it served the miners and trappers who worked the unforgiving territory well enough. The boarding house run by Mrs. Callahan offered hot food twice daily, and Yates had paid for a week's worth of meals, eager to enjoy something besides salted venison and whatever he could forage. That first evening, he had taken his seat at the long communal table alongside a dozen other patrons, mostly men who worked the nearby silver claims or drove freight wagons between the scattered Nevada settlements. The food was simple but plentiful: thick stew with chunks of beef and potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter that had been kept cool in the cellar, and strong coffee that could wake the dead. Yates ate with the focused efficiency of a man who spent most of his time alone in the wilderness, his muscular frame requiring substantial fuel. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his hands were scarred from years of hard work in the mountains. He noticed her immediately, because she was the only woman at the table besides Mrs. Callahan, who bustled in and out of the kitchen. The young woman sat at the far end, her thin frame almost lost in a faded calico dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely from a face that might have been pretty if not for the hollow look in her hazel eyes and the gauntness of her cheeks. She kept her gaze down, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Mrs. Callahan served the men first, ladling generous portions onto their plates, and they fell upon the food with the enthusiasm of men who labored hard for their living. Yates watched as the platters were passed around, each man taking what he wanted, the quantities diminishing as the food made its way down the table. When the serving dishes finally reached the young woman, they contained only the scraps, the smallest pieces of meat, the burnt edges of bread, the vegetables that others had pushed aside. She took what remained without complaint, her expression never changing, as though this was simply the natural order of things. She broke off a small piece of the blackened bread and chewed it slowly, making it last, her eyes distant. Something in Yates's chest tightened at the sight. He had seen hunger before, had experienced it himself during his early years in the mountains when he was still learning to survive. But this was different. This was a woman who had been taught that she deserved only leftovers, only what others did not want. The next morning at breakfast, he watched her again. The pattern repeated itself exactly. The men were served first, took what they wanted, and she received what remained. A few broken pieces of fried eggs, a heel of bread, weak coffee from the bottom of the pot. She ate mechanically, without joy, simply taking in enough fuel to continue existing. Yates finished his own generous breakfast and stood, carrying his plate to the kitchen where Mrs. Callahan was already preparing for the lunch service. "The woman at the end of the table," he said quietly. "Who is she?" Mrs. Callahan's weathered face softened with sympathy. "That is Violet Jane. Poor thing came here about 6 months ago, traveling with a wagon train that was heading to California. Her parents died of fever along the way, and she had no money to continue on. I gave her a room in exchange for help with the cooking and cleaning. She works from before dawn until well after dark, never complains, never asks for anything." "Why does she eat last?" Yates asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The older woman sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I have told her she is welcome to eat with everyone else, that she should serve herself a proper portion, but she insists she will take only what is left. Says she does not want to be a burden, that she is grateful for whatever scraps she can get. I think her family must have been very poor, and she learned to go without. It breaks my heart, but I cannot force her to value herself more than she does. Yates nodded slowly, an idea forming in his mind. He was a man of action, not words, and he understood that he could not simply tell Violet Jane she deserved better. She had to experience it, had to learn through the consistent actions of someone who saw her worth even when she could not see it herself. That evening he arrived at the dining room early, before any of the other boarders. Violet was already there, setting the table with careful precision, making sure each fork and knife was perfectly aligned. She startled slightly when she saw him, her eyes widening. "Evening," Yates said, his voice a deep rumble that came from somewhere in his broad chest. "I wanted to speak with you before the others arrive." She looked uncertain, almost frightened, and he realized she probably had little experience with men addressing her directly. He softened his tone, keeping his posture non-threatening despite his considerable size. At 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle built from years of hauling traps through mountain snow and wrestling with the wilderness itself, he knew he could be intimidating. "I have a proposition for you," he continued. "I have been eating more than my share these past days, and I find it wasteful. I would like you to help me by taking your meal first, before the platters become depleted. That way, I can better judge how much I actually need, rather than taking too much out of habit." It was a transparent fiction, and they both knew it, but he presented it seriously, giving her a way to accept without feeling like charity. Violet's brow furrowed. "I could not possibly do that, sir. It would not be proper for me to serve myself before the paying guests." "I am asking you to do me a service," Yates insisted. "I do not like waste. My mother raised me to take only what I need and leave the rest for others, but I have gotten out of the habit, living alone on my claim. You would be helping me remember her lessons." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she gave a tiny nod. "If it would truly help you, sir, then I suppose I could oblige." "Yates," he said. "My name is Yates Quinlan." "And you are Violet, yes?" "Violet Jane," she confirmed, the barest hint of color touching her pale cheeks. The other boarders began arriving, taking their usual seats, talking amongst themselves about the day's work and the falling price of silver. Mrs. Callahan brought out the evening meal: platters of fried chicken, bowls of green beans cooked with bacon, mashed potatoes swimming in butter, and a basket of golden biscuits that steamed when broken open. Before the first dish could be passed to the hungry men, Yates stood and reached for it. "Miss Jane has agreed to help me with something," he announced to the table. "She will be serving herself first this evening, so I can better gauge proper portions. I have been taking too much and leaving too much on my plate, which is disrespectful to Mrs. Callahan's fine cooking." A few of the men looked confused, but most simply shrugged, unconcerned with the arrangements as long as they got their own food eventually. Yates handed the platter of chicken to Violet, who sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly. "Go on," he said gently. "Take a proper portion. A whole piece, not the scraps." She reached out with obvious reluctance and selected the smallest piece of chicken on the platter, a wing that was mostly bone. Yates shook his head. "That would not even satisfy a child, Miss Jane. Take a piece that will actually nourish you, please." Her hand hovered over the platter, and he could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she took a chicken breast, a decent-sized portion, and placed it on her plate with the care one might use handling precious china. The bowl of green beans came next, and again Yates waited, making sure she served herself before passing it along. Then the potatoes, the biscuits, the butter. By the time the platters had made their circuit of the table, Violet had a full meal in front of her, more food than she had probably eaten in a single sitting in months. She stared down at her plate, as though unsure what to do with such bounty. "Eat," Yates said quietly from his seat several places down the table. "It will get cold." She picked up her fork with a hand that still shook and took a small bite of the potatoes. Her eyes closed briefly, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. It was just mashed potatoes, but from her reaction, it might as well have been the finest delicacy. Yates applied himself to his own meal, but he watched her from the corner of his eye. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, making the food last. She did not finish everything on her plate, he noticed. She was not accustomed to such quantity, and her stomach had likely shrunk from months of near-starvation rations. When the meal ended and the boarders dispersed, Violet began clearing the table as she always did. Yates helped, carrying dishes to the kitchen despite her protests that it was not necessary. "Thank you," she said softly when they were alone in the kitchen, Mrs. Callahan having gone to check on something in the cellar. "That was very kind of you, what you did out there." "It was not kindness," Yates said. "It was basic decency. You work hard for your keep here and you deserve to eat proper meals like everyone else." "I am just grateful to have a roof over my head," Violet replied, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on one of the plates. "After my parents died, I thought I might end up on the streets or worse. Mrs. Callahan saved my life by taking me in. The least I can do is not be a burden." "Eating is not being a burden," Yates said firmly. "It is a basic human need. You are not taking food from anyone's mouth by feeding yourself properly." She did not respond, but he saw her jaw tighten, and he knew that his words had not truly reached her. Years of conditioning could not be undone with a single conversation. This would require patience and consistency, two things Yates had in abundance. When a man spent months alone in the mountains checking trap lines through snowdrifts taller than his head, he learned patience. When he committed to a course of action, he followed through with the same determination that had kept him alive in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The next morning at breakfast, Yates again ensured that Violet served herself first. And that evening at dinner, the same. The other boarders quickly grew accustomed to the new routine, and some even began to nod approvingly when Violet took her portions. A few of the older men, those who perhaps had daughters of their own somewhere, started making a point of passing dishes directly to her with encouraging words. "Try this cobbler, Miss Jane. Mrs. Callahan outdid herself today. These biscuits are best when they are hot. Take 2, take 3. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Violet began to take slightly larger portions. Her hand no longer shook when she served herself. The hollow look in her eyes started to recede as proper nutrition did its work. Color crept into her cheeks. She even smiled occasionally, though it was a shy, uncertain expression, as though she feared the happiness might be snatched away at any moment. Yates found reasons to linger in Sloane beyond his original plan of a single week. He told himself it was because the town had a better selection of supplies than he had expected, or because his pack horse needed more rest before the journey back to his mountain claim. But the truth, which he acknowledged only in the privacy of his own thoughts, was that he could not bring himself to leave while Violet was still so fragile, still so uncertain of her own worth. He began taking walks after dinner, and often Violet would be sitting on the boarding house's front porch, having completed her evening chores. The first time he asked if he could join her, She looked so shocked he thought she might faint. "I am hardly fit company for anyone," she protested. "I have no education, no skills beyond scrubbing floors and washing dishes. I have spent the last 8 months talking to myself and my horse," Yates said, settling his considerable frame onto the bench beside her. "Trust me, you are a significant improvement." That earned him another one of those rare, hesitant smiles. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple as it sank toward the distant mountains. "What is it like?" Violet asked eventually. "Living up there in the wilderness all alone?" "Quiet," Yates said. "Hard, beautiful, dangerous, sometimes all of those things in a single day. Do you not get lonely?" He considered the question honestly. "Sometimes, but I have always been more comfortable with solitude than crowds. Too many years as a child in crowded tenements back in New York, I suppose. When I came west and discovered I could have space, silence, room to breathe, it felt like a gift." "New York," Violet repeated, her voice tinged with wonder. "I have never been anywhere except the small farm where I grew up in Missouri and then the trail west. I cannot imagine a city so big. It was loud and dirty and full of people trying to survive by stepping on anyone who got in their way," Yates said. "I do not miss it. Give me an honest blizzard or a hungry mountain lion any day. At least those things are straightforward about trying to kill you." Violet laughed, a sound so unexpected and genuine that Yates felt warmth spread through his chest. He had not realized until that moment how much he wanted to hear that sound, to know that this sad, broken young woman could still find joy. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Yates continued to ensure Violet ate proper meals, and they spent the evenings talking on the porch. She told him about her childhood on the farm, about parents who had loved her but struggled with poverty so severe that going hungry was simply part of life. She had learned early to take the smallest portion, to claim she was not hungry so her younger siblings could eat. By the time fever had claimed her entire family during the wagon train journey, those habits were so deeply ingrained that she could not imagine any other way of being. Yates shared his own story, how he had fled New York at 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a fierce determination to find a better life. He had worked his way west doing any job that paid, learned to trap and hunt from an old mountain man named Silas, who had taken pity on the stubborn kid, who refused to give up despite knowing nothing about wilderness survival. When Silas died, he left Yates his claim and his cabin, and Yates had made it his home for the past 6 years, building a life of solitary independence. "You never think about settling down?" Violet asked one evening. Having a family, the question caught Yates off guard. He had not allowed himself to think much about such things, assuming that his chosen lifestyle precluded the possibility. What woman would want to live in a rough cabin, miles from the nearest town, enduring months of isolation and harsh winters? But as he looked at Violet in the fading light, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sun, her face no longer quite so gaunt, her eyes brighter than they had been when he first saw her, he found himself wondering, what if there was a woman who could find beauty in the wilderness as he did? What if companionship did not have to mean crowds and noise, but could instead be the quiet comfort of sharing a life with someone who understood? "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "but I have not yet met a woman who would tolerate my way of life." Violet looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I think some women might surprise you. Not everyone wants a fancy house in a city. Some people might find peace in the mountains." There was something in her voice, a wistfulness that made Yates's pulse quicken. He was not a man accustomed to reading subtle social cues, but even he could not miss the implication. "Miss Jane," he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. He could track a wounded elk through a snowstorm, could bring down a charging bear with a single shot, could survive a month with nothing but a knife and his wits. But the thought of speaking his feelings to this woman left him more nervous than any physical danger ever had. Violet stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. "I should help Mrs. Callahan with the breakfast preparations. She likes to have the dough rising overnight." She fled before Yates could respond, leaving him alone on the porch with his tumbling thoughts and the uncomfortable realization that somewhere along the way, ensuring this woman ate proper meals had transformed into something much deeper and more complex. Sleep eluded him that night in his rented room. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions he had spent years suppressing. He had built a life predicated on self-reliance, on needing nothing and no one. It was safer that way, simpler. Caring about someone meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of loss and pain, but it was too late for such rational considerations. He already cared. He cared that Violet ate enough. He cared that she smiled. He cared that she no longer flinched when someone spoke to her directly. He cared more than was wise or safe or convenient. The question was what to do about it. By morning, he had reached a decision. He would ask Violet if she would consider accompanying him back to his mountain claim. Not as his wife, not yet, but to see if she could tolerate the isolation and hardship. If she could, if she found any happiness there, then perhaps they might discuss a more permanent arrangement. It was not the most romantic proposal, but Yates was a practical man, and he would not ask a woman to commit her life to something she had never experienced. He found her in the kitchen after breakfast, her arms deep in dishwater, scrubbing the morning's plates and pans. Mrs. Callahan was in the dining room, so they had a moment of privacy. "Violet," he said, and she turned, her hands dripping soap suds onto the floor. "I need to return to my claim within the next few days. Winter comes early in the high country and I have preparations to make. But I find myself reluctant to leave." She bit her lower lip, a gesture he had come to recognize as nervousness. "You have already stayed far longer than you planned. I am sure your work has suffered for it." "That is not what concerns me," Yates said, stepping closer. "I am concerned about leaving you here, going back to eating scraps and thinking you deserve nothing better." "You have been very kind," Violet said quietly. "You have helped me more than you know, but you cannot stay in Sloane forever on my account. You have your own life." "Come with me." The words came out more abruptly than he intended, but there they were, hanging in the air between them. Violet's eyes went wide. "What? Come to my claim, see what the life is like. If you hate it, I will bring you back here, no questions asked. But if you think you might be able to tolerate it, if you think you could find any measure of happiness there, then perhaps we could discuss a future together." "I cannot possibly," Violet stammered. "It would not be proper. What would people think?" "I am not asking you to share my bed," Yates said bluntly, feeling heat rise in his face. "The cabin has 2 rooms. You would have your privacy. I am simply offering you the chance to see if a different life might suit you better than this one." "Why?" Violet asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Yates took a breath, forcing himself to speak the truth even though vulnerability felt like stepping off a cliff. "Because when I watch you eat proper meals, when I see you smile, when I hear you laugh, I feel something I have not felt in all my years in these mountains. I feel like I have found something worth more than all the gold and furs in the territory. And I think, perhaps, that you might feel something similar. But I could be wrong, and the only way to know is to spend time together in honesty, without the barriers of propriety and assumption." Tears welled in Violet's hazel eyes. "No one has ever spoken to me that way." No one has ever acted as though I mattered." "You matter," Yates said firmly. "You matter to Mrs. Callahan, who worries about you. You matter to the boarders who have started making sure you get the best pieces of meat. And you matter to me, more than I have the words to properly express." A tear spilled down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a sudsy hand, leaving a smear of soap bubbles on her face. Yates reached out and gently brushed them away with his thumb, the first time he had touched her beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands. "I am afraid," Violet whispered. "What if I am not strong enough for that life? What if I fail and disappoint you?" The woman who survived losing her entire family, who walked away from everything she knew with nothing but the clothes on her back, who has worked herself to exhaustion for 6 months without complaint. Yates shook his head. "That woman is one of the strongest people I have ever met. You will not fail. But even if things do not work out between us, even if you decide the mountains are not for you, you will still have tried. That takes courage." Violet searched his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "I will come. I will try." The relief that flooded through Yates was so intense it left him momentarily light-headed. "We will leave in 3 days. That will give you time to prepare and give me time to purchase additional supplies. Mrs. Callahan was surprised by the news but supportive once Yates explained his intentions. "That girl deserves happiness," the older woman said, pressing a package of food into Yates's hands for the journey. "You treat her right, you hear me? She has been through enough." "I will guard her with my life," Yates promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The journey to the mountain claim took 4 days, following narrow trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. Yates kept a careful eye on Violet, ready to slow their pace if she showed signs of fatigue, but she proved to be a capable rider despite her limited experience. She asked questions about the landscape, the plants and animals they saw, and listened with genuine interest as Yates explained how he read the signs of the wilderness. At night, he set up 2 separate bedrolls with a respectful distance between them, built a fire for warmth and cooking, and prepared simple meals. Each time he made sure Violet had her portion first, took the best pieces, ate her fill. She no longer protested, though he sometimes caught her looking at him with an expression of wonder, as though she still could not quite believe someone cared whether she ate. On the 4th day, they climbed a steep ridge, and as they crested the top, Yates gestured to the valley below. "There. That is home." The cabin sat in a small clearing beside a stream that tumbled down from the higher peaks. It was built of solid logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney at one end and a small covered porch at the front. Behind it stood a shed for storing furs and supplies, and a small corral where Yates kept his horses during the worst of the winter weather. The surrounding forest was a mix of pine and aspen, and the higher peaks were already dusted with early snow that gleamed white against the brilliant blue sky. "It is beautiful," Violet breathed, "like something from a painting." Pride swelled in Yates's chest. He had built this place with his own hands, had carved out a life in the wilderness through sheer determination and hard work. Hearing her appreciation meant more than he could express. They rode down into the valley as the afternoon sun slanted through the trees. Yates showed Violet the cabin, the main room with its stone fireplace and handmade furniture, the smaller back room that he used for storage but which would serve as her private space. It was rough and simple, but it was clean and solid, proof against the fierce mountain winters. "I will build you a proper bed frame," Yates said, already planning the work in his mind. "And we will need to make curtains for the window, get you some warmer blankets. The temperatures drop fast once the snow starts in earnest." "It is perfect," Violet said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table he had made during his second winter in the cabin. when he had too much time and needed to keep his hands busy. "I cannot believe you built all this yourself." "A man gets industrious when the alternative is freezing to death," Yates said with a slight smile. "I will teach you what you need to know to survive up here, how to read the weather, how to preserve food, how to handle a rifle in case of predators. You will not be helpless." They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Yates rose before dawn, as was his habit, and started the fire, putting on coffee and beginning breakfast. The first morning, Violet emerged from her room looking mortified. "You should have woken me," she said. "I should be doing this. You have been so kind, and I am just sleeping while you work." "You are my guest, not my servant," Yates said firmly, "and I enjoy cooking. It is one of the few domestic skills I have mastered." He had already prepared eggs from the small flock of chickens he kept, along with bacon and fresh biscuits made from the sourdough starter he maintained year-round. He handed Violet a full plate and watched with satisfaction as she ate without hesitation, no longer waiting to see if he wanted more first. After breakfast, Yates showed her the property, explaining how he managed the trap lines that spread out through the surrounding forest, how he hunted for meat, how he gathered and preserved wild foods to supplement his supplies. Violet listened intently, asking intelligent questions, and Yates found himself enjoying the role of teacher. In the afternoons, he taught her to shoot, starting with a lighter rifle that would not knock her off her feet with the recoil. She had a steady hand and a good eye, and by the end of the first week she could hit a target at 30 paces more often than not. "Why does this feel important?" Violet asked one day as she reloaded after a successful shot. "You are here to protect me, are you not?" "I am," Yates confirmed. "And I always will be. But what if something happened to me? What if I was injured or ill and you needed to fend for yourself? I will not leave you helpless. You deserve the tools to survive whatever comes." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Teach me everything. I want to be worthy of this place, of this life." "You are already worthy," Yates said quietly, "but I will teach you everything I know if that is what you want." The evenings were Yates's favorite time. They would prepare dinner together, Violet learning to cook over the wood stove and the open fire with increasing confidence. Yates made sure she ate first, always, took the choicest pieces, never went without. It had become as natural as breathing, this need to ensure she was cared for, nourished, valued. After the meal was cleared away, they would sit by the fire, and Violet would read aloud from the small collection of books Yates owned. He loved listening to her voice, the way she brought the words to life with different inflections for different characters. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories and dreams, growing more comfortable with each passing day. One evening, about a month after their arrival at the cabin, Violet set down the book she had been reading and looked at Yates with unusual seriousness. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to be honest with me in return." Yates felt his stomach tighten with apprehension, but he nodded. "Always." "I do not want to go back to Sloan," Violet said. "I know I told you I would try this life and see if it suited me, but the truth is, I knew within the first day that this is where I belong. I love the silence, the beauty, the challenge of it. I love learning new skills. I love the way the mountains look at sunrise and the sound of the stream at night. I love this cabin and this life." She paused, her courage seeming to falter, then pushed forward. "And I think I am falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop. Yates could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the weight of this moment, the way it balanced on the edge of something profound and irreversible. "I have never been good with words," he said roughly. "I am better with actions, with showing rather than telling. But you deserve to hear the truth spoken plainly. I am already in love with you, Violet. I think I started falling the moment I saw you take those scraps and act like it was all you deserved. It made me angry and sad and determined all at once. I wanted to show you that you were worth so much more, and every day since then I have fallen deeper." Violet's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling, a full, genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "What do we do now?" "Now." Yates stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. "Now I ask if you will marry me. If you will stay here not as a guest or a trial, but as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. I cannot offer you a fancy house or fine dresses or an easy life. But I can offer you my absolute devotion, my protection, and the promise that you will always, always eat first and have the best of everything I can provide." Violet laughed and cried at the same time, reaching out to cup his bearded face in her hands. "Yes, yes to all of it." Yates kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held all the tenderness he felt for this remarkable woman. When they pulled apart, both breathing a little unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "We will have to go back to Sloane to find a preacher," he said. "I want to do this properly. I would marry you right here, right now, with just the mountains as witnesses," Violet said. "But yes, we can do it properly." They made the journey back to Sloane 2 weeks later, timing it to ensure they could return to the claim before the worst of the winter weather set in. Mrs. Callahan wept happy tears when they told her the news and insisted on hosting a small celebration at the boarding house after the ceremony. The wedding itself was simple, conducted by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through the settlement. Violet wore a new dress that Mrs. Callahan had helped her make from fabric Yates purchased with some of his gold dust. It was deep green, the color of pine trees, and it made her hazel eyes look luminous. Yates wore his cleanest shirt and had trimmed his beard, though his hair still hung long and wild past his shoulders. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage, about the way two people could become stronger together than they ever were apart. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed his bride with a joy so profound it felt like his chest might burst with it. At the celebration that followed, the boarding house residents toasted the couple with Mrs. Callahan's homemade wine. Several of the older men pulled Yates aside to tell him he was a lucky man and to treat his wife well. Yates assured them he had every intention of doing exactly that. As the evening wore on, one of the miners, a grizzled fellow named Pete, approached Yates with a curious expression. "Can I ask you something? That business with making sure your wife ate first before you even courted her proper. What made you do that?" Yates considered the question. "I saw someone who had been taught she did not matter, that her needs were less important than everyone else's. And I knew from my own experience that sometimes the most powerful way to show someone their worth is through consistent, undeniable action. Words are easy. Anyone can say kind things. But showing someone, day after day, through your choices and your behavior, that you value them, that changes something fundamental." Pete nodded slowly. "That is some powerful wisdom for a mountain man. My mother used to say that how you treat people when they have nothing to offer you in return reveals your true character," Yates said. "Violet had nothing when I met her. She was surviving on scraps and leftover kindness, but I saw strength in her, grace, resilience. She deserved to be cherished, and I wanted to be the one to do it." The older miner clapped him on the shoulder. "She is lucky to have found you, and I think you are just as lucky to have found her." Yates looked across the room to where Violet was talking with Mrs. Callahan, her face animated and happy, so different from the hollow-eyed woman he had first encountered. "Luckier than I ever imagined I could be." They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, in the same room Yates had rented months before. But this time, Violet was with him, his wife in truth and law, and when he held her close, he felt a completeness he had never experienced in all his solitary years. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked the next morning as they prepared for the journey back to the mountains. Violet smiled, the word home settling over her like a blessing. "I have never been more ready for anything." The return journey was slower than their previous trips, as they were hauling additional supplies and taking their time, savoring the last mild weather before winter locked down the high country. They talked about their plans, about how they would manage the trap lines together this year, about improvements they could make to the cabin. "I want to plant a garden come spring," Violet said. "A real one with vegetables and herbs, and maybe we could expand the chicken coop, get a few more hens." "We could get a milk cow," Yates added. "There is a meadow about a half-mile from the cabin that would provide good grazing in the summer, fresh milk, butter, cheese." "Cheese," Violet said dreamily. "I have not had good cheese in years." "Then you shall have cheese," Yates promised. "Whatever you want, whatever I can provide, it is yours." When they arrived back at the cabin, Yates insisted on carrying Violet over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently in the middle of their main room, and they both stood there for a moment, letting the significance of the moment wash over them. This was their home now, truly, a sanctuary they would build together. The winter that followed was harsh, as mountain winters always were. Snow piled up past the windows, and there were days when the wind howled so fiercely that venturing outside was dangerous. But inside the cabin, Yates and Violet created a world of warmth and companionship. Yates taught Violet how to process the furs he brought in from his traps, how to scrape and cure the hides until they were soft and supple. She proved to have a talent for it, and her careful work yielded higher quality pelts that would bring better prices come spring. In turn, Violet reorganized the cabin with a woman's practical eye, creating storage solutions Yates had never thought to implement, and established routines that made their daily life run more smoothly. She experimented with the limited ingredients available, creating meals that were simple but delicious, always making sure to give Yates the best portions, a habit that amused him to no end. "You do not have to give me the biggest piece of meat," he told her one evening. "I am not the one who spent years going hungry." "But you work so hard," Violet protested. "You need your strength for the trap lines and hunting." "We both work hard," Yates said, "and I am twice your size. I can afford to eat a little less. You take the best cut tonight." They compromised, splitting the best pieces evenly, and Yates felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that Violet was finally, truly accepting that she deserved good things. One afternoon in the deep of winter, they were sitting by the fire, Violet mending one of Yates's shirts while he worked on repairing a snowshoe that had broken. Outside, snow fell in thick, soft flakes, blanketing the world in white silence. "Are you happy?" Yates asked suddenly. "Truly happy, not just content or managing." Violet set down her mending and looked at him with eyes that held no shadows, no doubt. "I am happier than I ever imagined I could be. There are moments when I cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up every morning in this beautiful place with you beside me. Sometimes I worry it might all be a dream." "It is no dream," Yates said, reaching over to take her hand. "This is real. We are real. And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your place here, your worth, your importance to me." "You already do that," Violet said softly. "Every single day in 100 small ways. The way you make sure I eat first, the way you ask my opinion on decisions, the way you teach me skills instead of just doing everything yourself, the way you look at me like I am precious. I see it all, and it heals something in me that I did not even realize was broken." Yates pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his broad chest. "You healed something in me too. I did not realize how lonely I was until you filled that emptiness. This cabin was just a shelter before. Now it is a home." As winter gradually loosened its grip, and the first hints of spring began to show, Violet started feeling unwell in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to something she ate, but when the pattern continued for more than a week, a different possibility occurred to her. She waited until she was certain before telling Yates, choosing a moment when they were sitting on the porch in the early evening, watching the last of the snow melt in the valley below. The air was crisp but no longer bitterly cold, and the sound of running water was everywhere as the streams swelled with snowmelt. "I have something to tell you," Violet said, her heart pounding. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Yates went very still. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features into something almost boyish with joy. "A baby, truly, truly," Violet confirmed. "Sometime in the fall, I think, though I cannot be certain of the exact timing." Yates let out a whoop of pure happiness that echoed off the mountains, then swept Violet into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down with exaggerated care, as though she had suddenly become made of glass. "You have to be careful now," he said seriously. "No heavy lifting, no dangerous work, plenty of rest and good food." Violet laughed. "I am pregnant, not fragile. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while continuing to work and live their lives." "But you are not just any woman," Yates said. "You are my woman, carrying my child, and I will take no chances with either of your lives." They compromised as they had learned to do over the months of their marriage. Violet continued to work, but Yates took on the more physically demanding tasks and ensured she had time to rest. He hunted more frequently, making sure they had plenty of fresh meat, and encouraged her to eat as much as she could stomach, despite the morning sickness that plagued her through the early months. As Violet's belly grew, Yates began preparing for the baby's arrival with the same focused determination he brought to everything. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges, and Violet sewed soft blankets from fabric they had purchased during a supply run to Sloan. That trip to town was bittersweet. Everyone was thrilled about the baby, and Mrs. Callahan pressed packages of infant clothes and supplies into their hands, refusing to accept any payment. But the journey itself was difficult for Violet in her condition, and they both knew it would likely be the last time she could make the trip before the baby came. "What if something goes wrong?" Violet asked quietly on the journey back to the cabin. "What if I need help and there is no one?" "I have been reading everything I can find about childbirth," Yates said, "and I have delivered foals and calves. I know it is not the same, but I understand the basics." "We will manage, and you are strong, Violet, stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I am frightened," she admitted. "My mother died giving birth to my youngest sister. What if the same thing happens to me?" Yates pulled his horse close to hers and reached over to take her hand. "Look at me. I will not let anything happen to you. I swear on my life, I will keep you safe." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, calmed something in Violet. She knew the risks, knew that childbirth in the wilderness was dangerous. But she also knew that Yates would do everything in his power to protect her, and that would have to be enough. The baby came on a crisp October evening, the labor beginning just after sunset. Yates had been preparing for this moment for months, and he moved through the necessary tasks with calm efficiency, despite the fear churning in his gut. He helped Violet through the contractions, supporting her when she needed to walk, offering water and cool cloths for her forehead, speaking soothing words even as his own heart raced with terror. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Yates thought he might lose his mind with fear, when Violet's screams of pain made him want to rage at his own helplessness. But he stayed beside her, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her face, telling her she was strong. She was doing perfectly, just a little longer. And then, finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, a baby's cry pierced the air. Yates looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant in his hands and felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of the world. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." Violet reached for the baby with trembling arms, and Yates placed the child gently on her chest. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, her face pale, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Yates cleaned and wrapped the baby in the soft blankets Violet had made, then helped her get settled in their bed with the infant nursing at her breast. He could not stop staring at them, his wife and his son, overcome with a love so fierce and protective it was almost frightening in its intensity. "What should we name him?" Violet asked, looking up at Yates with tired but happy eyes. "I want to name him after my father," Yates said. "Thomas. He was a good man who worked himself to death in the factories trying to provide for his family. He deserves to be remembered." "Thomas Quinlan," Violet said, testing the name. "It is perfect." The weeks following Thomas's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. The baby was healthy and strong, but caring for an infant in a mountain cabin presented challenges Yates had not fully anticipated. Violet needed time to recover from the birth, so Yates took on even more of the household tasks, managing the trap lines, the hunting, the cooking, the cleaning, and helping with the baby whenever Violet needed rest. He had never been so exhausted in his life, but he had also never been happier. Watching Violet nurse their son, seeing her gentle with the baby despite her own fatigue, observing the fierce maternal love in her eyes, Yates felt blessed beyond measure. One evening, when Thomas was about a month old, Yates sat holding his son while Violet ate her dinner. The baby was tiny in his large, scarred hands, but Yates cradled him with exquisite care, marveling at the perfect little fingers, the wisps of dark hair, the eyes that were just beginning to focus on the world around him. "You will never go hungry," Yates told his son quietly. "You will never feel like you do not matter. Your mother and I will make sure you know every single day that you are loved, that you are valued, that you are important. You will eat first and have the best of everything we can give you. That is my promise to you." Violet, listening from the table, felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this mountain of strength and fierce devotion, had transformed her entire world. He had seen her when she was invisible, had valued her when she felt worthless, had loved her when she could not love herself. And now he was extending that same unwavering commitment to their child. "Come eat," she said softly. "I saved you the best piece of venison." Yates smiled, that rare, genuine expression that still had the power to make her heart skip. "Only if you took an equally good piece for yourself." "I did," Violet assured him. "See, I am learning." The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. Yates taught him to walk in the mountain meadows, to identify animal tracks, to respect the wilderness that was their home. Violet taught him letters and numbers, read to him from their small collection of books, and instilled in him the values of kindness and gratitude. When Thomas was 3 years old, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and when her labor began on a spring evening, it progressed much more quickly. By midnight, they had a daughter, a tiny thing with auburn hair that matched her mother's and a cry that could wake the entire valley. "What about Sarah?" Violet suggested, cradling the baby. "After your mother," Yates nodded, emotion thick in his throat. His mother had died when he was young, but he remembered her gentleness, her strength. Sarah Quinlan. She would have loved knowing she had a granddaughter named after her. They expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family, adding another room and a larger porch. Yates built a bigger table so they could all sit together for meals, and every single time they ate, he made sure the children were served first, then Violet, and only then would he fill his own plate. Thomas noticed this pattern as he grew older and asked about it one day when he was about 7 years old. "Papa, why do you always let us eat first? Should not you take food first since you are the father?" Yates set down his serving spoon and looked at his son seriously. "Come here and I will tell you a story." Thomas climbed onto his father's lap, and Sarah, now 4 years old, scrambled up as well, not wanting to miss anything. Violet paused in her own eating, curious to hear what Yates would say. "When I first met your mother," Yates began, "she was living in a boarding house in Sloan, working very hard for just a room and whatever food was left after everyone else had eaten. She had learned to believe that she did not deserve better, that taking only the scraps was proper. And that broke my heart because I could see how special she was, how strong and brave and good. So I decided to show her every single day that she mattered. I made sure she ate first, got the best portions, never went without. And slowly she started to believe it." "Because you showed her with actions, not just words," Thomas said, with the insight of a bright child. "Exactly," Yates confirmed. "Words are important, but actions prove what you really believe. When I make sure you and your sister and your mother eat first, when I give you the best of what we have, I am showing you that I love you, that your needs matter to me, that taking care of you is not a burden but a privilege. I want to be like that when I grow up," Thomas declared. "I want to take care of people. Then you will be a good man," Yates said, hugging his son close. "That is all I could ever ask." Sarah, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Mama, were you really very hungry before you met Papa?" Violet reached over and stroked her daughter's auburn hair. "I was, sweet girl. Not just hungry for food, but hungry for kindness, for someone to see me and value me. Your Papa gave me all of that and more." "I am glad Papa found you," Sarah said simply. "Otherwise, we would not be here." "I am glad too," Violet said, catching Yates's eye across the table and sharing a smile that held years of love and understanding. As the children grew, the family made occasional trips to Sloan, where Thomas and Sarah were treated like celebrities by the boarding house residents who remembered when Violet had been a timid girl eating scraps. Mrs. Callahan, now elderly but still sharp as ever, doted on the children and always sent them home with packages of sweets and small gifts. "You did good," she told Yates during one visit, watching as Thomas helped his little sister climb onto a chair. "That boy has your strength and Violet's kindness. He will be something special." "They both will," Yates said, watching Sarah chatter happily to one of the boarders who was pretending to be fascinated by her description of a bird's nest she had found. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 7, Violet realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with more trepidation than joy. She was older now, and the risks of childbirth increased with age, especially in the wilderness far from medical help. Yates tried to hide his fear, but Violet knew him too well. "We will be fine," she assured him. "We have done this twice before." "You were younger then," Yates said quietly. If something happened to you, if I lost you, I would not survive it. You would, Violet said firmly, because our children need you, but nothing is going to happen. I am healthy and strong, and you are the most capable man I know. We will manage, just like we always have. The pregnancy was difficult, with Violet suffering from fatigue and sickness more than she had with the previous two. Yates took on even more of the work, and Thomas and Sarah, old enough to understand, helped as much as they could. Sarah learned to cook simple meals, and Thomas helped his father with the trap lines and hunting, growing into the role of assistant with pride and determination. When Violet's labor began on a cold December night, Yates felt the old fear grip him, but he pushed it down, focusing on what needed to be done. Thomas took Sarah to sleep in the other room, understanding that his mother needed quiet and his father needed to concentrate. The labor was long and exhausting, and there were moments when Yates genuinely feared he might lose his wife. But Violet was as strong as he had always known her to be, and as dawn broke over the mountains, a baby's cry announced the arrival of their third child. Another boy, Yates said, placing the infant in Violet's arms. A big, healthy boy. Violet was pale and exhausted, but she smiled as she looked down at her new son. We should let the children name him. They have been so good through all of this. When Thomas and Sarah were brought in to meet their new brother, their faces lit up with wonder. He is so tiny, Sarah breathed. What should we call him? Yates asked. Thomas considered seriously. What about Daniel? There is a Daniel in the book Mama reads to us, and he was brave. Daniel Quinlan, Violet said. I like it. What do you think, Papa? Yates looked at his family, his wife exhausted but radiant, his daughter leaning carefully over the baby, his older son standing proud at having been given such an important responsibility, and the newest addition to their family squirming in Violet's arms. His heart felt so full he thought it might burst. Daniel is perfect, he said. Just like all of you. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew strong and capable, learning the skills necessary to thrive in the mountain wilderness. Thomas developed his father's talent for tracking and hunting, while Sarah showed a gift for growing things, turning their small vegetable garden into an impressive food source. Daniel, as he grew, proved to have a curious mind and a gentle heart, always the first to comfort an injured animal or help a struggling sibling. Yates and Violet aged together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. There were hard times, winters when game was scarce, a forest fire one summer that came terrifyingly close to their cabin, illnesses and injuries that tested their resolve. But through it all, they faced each challenge as a team, their commitment to each other and their family never wavering. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates suggested they return to Sloan for a visit, just the two of them, leaving the children in Thomas's capable care for a few days. Violet agreed eagerly, excited to see Mrs. Callahan and the familiar places where their story had begun. The town had grown over the years, with more permanent buildings and a larger population, but the boarding house was still there, now run by Mrs. Callahan's daughter, but still offering the same warm hospitality. The older woman, now in her 80s and moving slowly, wept when she saw Yates and Violet arrive. "Look at you both," she said, clasping their hands. "Still so in love after all these years. It does my heart good." That evening they sat on the boarding house porch just as they had 2 decades before, watching the sun set over the Nevada desert. Violet leaned against Yates's broad shoulder, marveling at how familiar and right it still felt. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked quietly. Choosing this life, the isolation, the hardship. Violet turned to look at her husband. His hair was now more silver than dark, his face weathered by years of mountain sun and wind, but his eyes still held the same fierce devotion that had first captured her heart. Not for a single moment. You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, purpose, the knowledge that I am valued and cherished. How could I regret that? I was so afraid that first day, Yates admitted. When I asked you to come to the mountains with me, I thought surely you would refuse, that I had misread everything. I was afraid too, Violet said. But you had already shown me, through weeks of consistent kindness, that you were someone I could trust, making sure I ate first, ensuring I never went without, treating me like I mattered when I had spent so long believing I did not. Those actions gave me the courage to take a chance on you, on us. Best decision I ever made, Yates said, pressing a kiss to her hair. Asking you to marry me. Best decision I ever made, saying yes, Violet replied. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, who had built a life of love and purpose in the wild places of the world. When they returned to the cabin, their children greeted them with the news that Sarah, now 17 and courted by a young man from one of the neighboring claims, was engaged to be married. Violet cried happy tears while Yates grilled the prospective groom thoroughly, making sure the young man understood the standard to which he would be held as Sarah's husband. You will treat her like she is the most precious thing in your world, Yates said sternly. You will make sure she eats first, that her needs are met before your own, that she never doubts her value or importance. If you cannot commit to that, then you are not worthy of my daughter. The young man, somewhat intimidated by Yates's imposing presence, nevertheless met his gaze steadily. Sir, I love Sarah more than my own life. I would sooner cut off my own arm than see her hurt or neglected. You have my word that I will spend every day showing her how much she means to me. Yates studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then you have my blessing. Sarah's wedding took place the following spring. A small ceremony held in the valley near the cabin with a traveling preacher officiating. Violet helped her daughter make a beautiful dress, and Yates built the young couple a cabin on a nearby claim, making sure it was solid and weatherproof. As he walked Sarah down the aisle, he thought about the scared, hungry young woman who had taken only scraps, and how she had blossomed into the confident, radiant woman beside him. He thought about how the simple act of ensuring she ate first had been the beginning of everything, and how that small kindness had rippled out to create this beautiful, complicated, wonderful family. Thomas married a few years later, choosing a strong-minded young woman from one of the mining families who was not intimidated by the isolation of mountain life. Daniel, as he grew into adulthood, surprised everyone by deciding to pursue education, eventually leaving the mountains to attend a school in California, though he returned every summer to help with the family claim. Yates and Violet became grandparents multiple times over, their cabin frequently filled with the sound of children's laughter and the organized chaos of family gatherings. They aged gracefully, their bodies showing the wear of hard living but their spirits remaining strong. Yates's hair turned fully white, and Violet developed lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but they still held hands on the porch every evening, still found joy in each other's company, still made sure to serve each other first at meals, a habit so ingrained it had become second nature. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a surprise celebration, gathering at the mountain cabin that had been the center of their family life for so long. There was food and music and laughter, stories told and memories shared. At one point, their eldest grandchild, Thomas's daughter Emma, asked them to share the story of how they met. Yates and Violet exchanged a look, having told this story many times over the years, but they never tired of it. Violet began, describing the boarding house in Sloan and how she had felt so lost and alone after losing her family. Yates took over, explaining how he had noticed her eating scraps and decided to do something about it. "The thing you must understand," Yates said, looking around at his family, "is that your grandmother had been taught by circumstances that she did not matter, that her needs were less important than others. I could not let that stand. So I showed her every single day through my actions that she was important, that she deserved good things, that she mattered to me. And it changed everything," Violet added. "Not just because I finally had enough to eat, though that was certainly important, but because someone saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth the effort. That kind of consistent, demonstrative love has the power to heal and transform." "That is why we always serve the children first," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "Why you taught us to make sure our families eat before we do. It is about more than food." "It is about showing love through action," Sarah agreed. "About making sure the people we care about know they are valued." "Exactly," Yates said. "Anyone can say they love you, but proving it, day after day, through small acts of service and sacrifice. That is real love. That is the kind of love that lasts." As the celebration continued around them, Yates pulled Violet close, marveling at how this woman still fit so perfectly in his arms after 4 decades. "I would do it all again," he whispered. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "I know," Violet said, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "You have been showing me that for 40 years, and I would choose you too, my mountain man, my protector, my love." They lived many more years together, growing old in the place they had made their home, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward the lessons they had taught about love and service and valuing the people who mattered. When Yates finally passed away at the age of 78, peaceful in his sleep with Violet beside him, she mourned deeply but not despairingly. They had been blessed with a lifetime of love, and she carried his memory and his lessons in her heart. Violet lived another 5 years, spending her time with her family, telling stories about Yates and the life they had built together, making sure the next generations understood the power of showing love through consistent action. When her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her deeply and who had learned from her example how to value and cherish the people in their lives. At her funeral, Thomas stood to speak about his mother, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother taught us many things," he said. "But the most important lesson was one she learned from my father, that every person has inherent worth and deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. My father saw that in my mother when she could not see it in herself, and he spent every day of their marriage showing her through his actions that she mattered. She, in turn, taught us to extend that same grace to others, to serve those we love, to make sure they eat first and have the best of what we can give, not because it is required, but because love is most powerfully expressed through sacrifice and service." The valley where the Quinlan cabin stood became something of a family compound over the generations, with descendants building their own homes nearby, all of them drawn to the place where Yates and Violet had first made their life together. The original cabin was preserved and maintained, a reminder of where it all began, of the mountain man who saw a woman eating scraps and decided to spend his life making sure she always had first choice. The story of Yates and Violet became a family legend, passed down through generations, a testament to the transformative power of love demonstrated through consistent, selfless action. Children who would never meet their ancestors still learned about how Grandpa Yates had courted Grandma Violet by making sure she ate first. About how that simple act of kindness had been the foundation for a love that lasted a lifetime and influenced countless lives. And in the mountains of Nevada, where the streams still ran clear and the peaks still touched the sky, the legacy of a mountain man and the woman he loved lived on. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful way to show someone they matter is through the small, daily choices we make to put their needs before our own, to ensure they always have first choice, to demonstrate through action that they are cherished beyond measure. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though it had its share of both. It was a story built on the quiet, consistent choices of two people who chose each other every single day, who showed their love through service and sacrifice, who understood that making sure your beloved eats first is about so much more than food. It is about honor, respect, value, and the deep, abiding commitment to ensure that the person you love knows without question that they matter. And that is a lesson worth passing down through the generations, a legacy more valuable than gold, more enduring than the mountains themselves.